it's top 10 time. Yes, it's been a while, but I've had to collate some ideas off my Patreons and some other people. And yep, we got some good ideas on the way. You know, in the future, we're looking at things like top 10 games that need a deluxe version. Well, in my opinion, that is not, must have. And top 10 board game apps are on the way. So, I do play a lot of board game apps. Which ones are my 10 favorite? And believe me, there's a lot of good choices out there. But today it's my top 10 story-driven games. Now, one thing I noticed about making this list, it's quite hard when you put a caveat as big as I did on there. And secondly, with these games, every single one on this list, I think maybe bar one, I can't remember what I originally rated it, but basically they all rate 9 or above. They are highly loved games by me. And even the ones that I thought didn't make the list because of the caveat, were like rated 9 plus games. If you give me a story-driven game and you do it well, I will love it. It just happens to be that way. Now, that's not to say that all story-driven games work for me. There are some that fall short of the mark. So, you have to do it well, but if we do it well, I'm going to love it. Love it so much. I just like that. It adds to the thematic immersion. And you know me, I'm a big lover of theme, so naturally the two kind of just mesh together quite well. So what was this caveat? Well, story-driven games, I think of them as the story drives the game. Well, okay, alright, that's a really bad definition. Where you play the game and the story is one of the main focal points. Like, you are really engaged enough to know what is the next part of the story. Yes, you're enjoying the mechanics and everything as well, but you want to know how the story progresses. You want the game to change as you play it based on the story. So maybe you'll play through like 1/3 of the game and then the story changes up and suddenly the second half of your game is a completely different story, and then you're left with a weird fraction because 1/3 plus 1/2 doesn't leave me with an end game. But like I say, doesn't help when you're doing this after a long week at work, and secondly, treating yourself for the night. So yeah, trust me, that's my first glass, alright? It's not like I've had loads or anything, but I made a casserole earlier, so you've got to use the rest of the bowl. Anyway, so yes, top 10 story-driven games, enough weird talk. Oh yeah, the caveat, I gotta remember. Yes, like I say, the story has to be the main focal point. If the game is more about, here's some little events that happen, they will be good, but it doesn't quite gel into the story much for me. There may be one on my list that kind of breaks that rule, but for the most part, it's like, I need to feel like this is one cohesive story rather than just, this is a scenario and here's some events that happen at random. It's kind of hard to put together. Maybe you'll disagree with some of these. There were a few other good choices, and I'm sure plenty of you will like the honorable mention that comes up from the Patreon choice. But yeah, let's see what my 10 are. My number 10 would have actually been much higher if I did this list about 2 years ago. It has slipped a lot. In fact, it actually has one last chance to redeem itself. Otherwise, I'm actually kind of done with this game. That's not to say I hate it anymore, but it started off on such a high note that it's now just kind of slipped by the wayside. And that is the once infamous, really, I suppose now, but the once famous Time Stories. When this came out at Essen, oh my god, did it get the buzz. So got the buzz. It was unreal. But with this, it's now kind of just slipped a bit. The scenarios have never, ever managed to measure to the sheer, amazement that the first one gave me, the Arkham Asylum one or whatever it was. That scenario was brilliant. I was like, oh, I'm going to love this game. Give me more scenarios. And then, with one or two exceptions, which I just found not particularly that enjoyable, there were some that were like, oh yeah, I like that one fine, I like that one fine, but they just never measured up. And, recently I'm like, okay, you're starting to run out of ideas, you need to hurry up and finish this plot. Well, I have yet to play Madame. I am recording this Friday the 10th. I'm going to be playing Madame scenario with the Game Shelf Girls on the 12th, so we'll see whether things change, but yeah, I have enjoyed this game. It is a great sort of, a great story-based game where you are going into these time capsules, traveling back through time and getting into a host. You're in a vessel and you control them, but you're trying to solve some anomaly. Something is going wrong with time and you have to fix it. but it's done with the cool card play system where you go to a location, this panoramic set of beautiful artistry on cards is laid out before you, and you go to one and flip it over, and it gives you the story element, but you don't know what the other cards say because other players are doing that. It's a full co-op, you've got the time travel element, you have Bob, who's basically just designed to infuriate you. You know, check out my top 10 annoying characters list if you want to know more on that one. But, you know, the game itself is still really enjoyable. I do like it, but if you asked me 2 years ago, this might have been somewhere like in the 3-4 mark. It is now just squeaking onto the list at number 10, and if Madame doesn't do it for me, it would fall off the list and I'd be done with Time Stories. So it's, you've got one more chance, mate. You were really good, but you gotta prove yourself. Redemption is at hand. At number 9, I can't be bothered to go to the other room and get it, so I'll just put a picture up, but it is one of the most unique games I have ever played. When I talk about that I like innovation in games, this is beyond innovative, and that is Fog of Love. Fog of Love is the one I mentioned earlier that might slightly break that rule that it's technically a story-driven game, but I'd say it still is. Yes, granted, the idea is that you and the other partner, and this could be, you know, it doesn't have to be, you could be boy or girl, 2 boys, 2 girls, whatever, and you are basically playing out this scenario, or story I guess, where you are on a date. And this is the first scenario, the introduction scenario. Later on you get things like second date, meeting the parents, marriage, divorce issues, you know, stuff like that. It gets pretty heavy at times. But the idea is that you are playing through this relationship and you're building up your character. So you've got your character and your own little personality traits. And these cards are flipped over to give you these scenarios, these sort of questions. Like, you are invited to, let's say, yeah, you both go out to the cinema and there's no film on that you fancy, but the girlfriend really wants to see some like horrible chick flick or something that you think is really corny and cheesy. Do you A, do this, B, do this, C, do this, and you both sort of agree on what it is you're going to do simultaneously in secret, flip over and see how compatible you are. Now, granted, it's hard to explain it really. You know, you're better off trying this game out when you find it at a convention. Trust me, it's an experience worth having, particularly if you're already in a relationship. But it's a weird one, but I still think it's story based because yes, you could argue that the cards are just basically events and scenarios, but the overarching story is, say in the first scenario, that you're on a first date. You're just, first date or the first stages of a relationship. So you're playing it from beginning to end. It is there's progression involved. And at the end, you're deciding, you know, whether you two are compatible and whether this relationship would work before moving on to the next scenario pack, which has you, say, you know, going out to a proper dinner date and like getting really into the serious stages of your relationship. I know you could argue. I'm not going to like completely like go against the grain of saying like, no, you guys are wrong. If you were to argue this doesn't technically fit a story-driven game, but I feel that every time I've played this, and it's not many times, I'll admit, it's a 2-player only game, it's hard for me to get those to the table. But, you know, I would love to just have someone come around and play it more often. But, yeah, it's a really intriguing game, so innovative, and as you're playing it, the story is playing out in my head. It's not like I'm trying to fill in the blanks. The story is coming out through the player's actions as well as the cards, without me having to fill in extra gaps, which is what the caveat took out some games earlier, because you feel like, yeah, I'm kind of inserting stories here, here, and here, whereas this one I feel like the story is playing out just in a different way to, say, reading a textbook on the subject. So, you know, it's a really interesting one. You get a chance to try it, I highly recommend it. This is probably one of the most innovative games I've ever seen, Fog of Love. But number 8 is a game that's really hard to get to the table because it's lengthy, it is involved, your brain will melt. Like literally, as you're playing it, you'll be like, oh, this is so good, this is so good. As your brain just seeps out through your ears. It's hard as all get out, and that is Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. It is a deduction game where you're trying to solve a case. It could be a murder mystery, a heist, whatever. But you are playing through a story as you're doing it, because it's an overarching story as you do it, and it's got the introduction and like the setup, and then you kind of do what you want. It's not entirely open-ended, but it'll give you the scenario. You've got like a newspaper you can read with a mixture of red herrings and useless information as well as useful information. And you choose where you want to go on this giant map of London or in this telephone directory of contacts that you have and read paragraphs from the book, a bit like a choose your own adventure style thing. And as you go through, the plot thickens. You might find complete red herrings, or you might find specific clues that you need to do. But as you're doing it, you're finding out more about the story. It's not just a bunch of little events that happen. This is the story. You're playing it out. Can you figure out who the murderer was, or who stole the thing, or how they did it, whatever, at the end of it? So there is still that story involved. But my God, you want a game that's an event. This is an event. Never play it with more than 3 players, and certainly leave yourself some spare time. There's another one on this list that's got that sort of caveat as well, but my God. Yeah, you want heavy deduction, you want proper, solid, I've got to read a ton of material, I've got to really think like Sherlock Holmes. This is kind of the one you want. And it's going to take me forever to get through this entire box, and there's at least 2 other boxes on top of this. There's a lot of these cases, and believe me, if you're a deduction game fan, you need this. This plays fantastically as a solo game, but I could see 2 or 3 people playing this fine. And certainly this is the kind of game where you like, a nice bit of wine and, enjoy the case, even though by the time you've had half a glass of it, you won't be able to fathom what the hell's going on in the case. And it is annoying that he almost made I don't know if he made my top 10 annoying characters. I don't think he did, but he was definitely on the shortlist. Sherlock Holmes himself. You're supposed to technically beat him. It is physically impossible to beat him. He is beyond clairvoyant. This isn't Sherlock from the TV series, the BBC series. Fantastic series. Oh, gone before its time. But there's no way he could possibly have done what he did without sheer luck. So you just ignore the fact that you're trying to beat his score and just go for, did you solve it, and how well did you did? Screw Sherlock, you don't need him. But yeah, it's a great story as you're doing it, you're engrossed, you want to find out more, and you want to get to the end. That's a good hallmark of a story-driven game. For number 7, one thing I did think about when I was doing this list was that the game didn't just have to be my top 10 favourites that happened to have a story. No, I had to think about how well the story engrossed me with the game, as well as how much did I enjoy it. So you're going to see a bit of a difference, a shift in the rankings, but this one, I'm really enjoying the game. Really enjoying the game. But the story I am interested in. I'm enjoying the scenario that I'm doing, but it's kind of the only story I've actually seen with it. And granted, it's kind of like Middle-earth short stories. That is the very recent, in fact, I'm going to get the big game off here. Whoop, here we go. There we go. Lord of the Rings, Journeys in Middle-earth. Very recent. I've only just recently reviewed this, actually, and I gave it a 9, I believe. And I am really enjoying it. It is a story-based game because you're playing through a campaign. Each scenario is different. Like one, you might be journeying through the wilderness trying to help a sick ranger. Another one, you're trying to figure out, who this spy is. And another one, you're trying to fend off an orc stronghold. There's all sorts of different scenarios in here. But the card play is interesting. It's tactical, where you're trying to decide, oh, do I want to prepare that card because it's a good ability, but it's got a success icon on it. Maybe I should keep this card. Even though it's not as good, I want success icons in my deck. And I'm about to do a really important test. I should put it on top rather than the bottom. It's, you're making little, not stupidly brain-birdie decisions. We're not talking like, Mage Knight or Gloomhaven levels of here, thinkiness here. But we're talking, rather than too much puzzle nature, we're talking more thematic nature. And this one, gives me that Lord of the Rings feeling. Granted, I am a Lord of the Rings fan. Not a complete nerd on the subject, but I love the movies and I love the LCG and the games based on Lord of the Rings. But certainly with this one, I'm interested to know more on the story. I play through a scenario and go, oh, that was a good bit of fun. And then I want to play it again. I want to know what the next stage is. Now, granted, I've only done the one campaign in this, so it's not like there's a ton of stories for me to base this on, so hence it can't really go further up the list. And certainly there are some stronger stories, in terms of the later games. But I have to give credit, this one surprised me as to how much I enjoyed it. I thought it was just going to be like, oh, it's another miniatures game with some, stuff in it, whatever. But the app drew me in. The app is really good, not buggy at all. It's kind of a bit like a simplified, shorter Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition. That's kind of the best way I could describe it. And I love both games, and I've got to say, Lord of the Rings has surprised me with this one. It's had divisive opinions, and I really don't know why.
Stupid fat hobbit! It ruins it!
I mean, I'm not saying you should all love it, but you either kind of love it or you hate it. There doesn't seem to be much of a middle ground, although I am starting to see a bit more of a resurgence since I did the last review video of more people coming out of the woodwork saying, nah, I love it, this is really good, da da da. So, who knows. But yeah, Journeys in Middle-earth, it's it's not the most brain-burny story in the world, but you want to know what happens next. You are playing through a story as you go through each scenario, and I like the fret marker in the app, which basically is the game timer, so it keeps it shortish, but it also means that as the fret reaches certain levels, different story elements happen and it could change up the game. That works well. I want to see that more often in future campaigns. We already know there's some DLC on the way. This hopefully can only get better for me, but for now, it still holds its place at a worthy number 7. My number 6, I got to be a bit careful because even though it's got a folded space insert, it doesn't fit on entirely, and there's a lot of components in here, but Near and Far makes a worthy number 6. This is one of Ryan Laukatt's best games he's done. Not my favourite game he's done. I still think Empires of the Void 2 is brilliant, but this one is still an excellent game in its own right. With Near and Far, it takes what Above and Below did, but makes it a lot better. Above and Below had some okay story elements, but it was pretty much a slightly, dreary, well, not dreary, but meh Euro game behind it. This one actually makes the Euro game behind it interesting and, decent and tactical and just kind of nicely thematic, but you can play through a campaign either as a 12 story thing or as a multiple character campaign. So you could take a character and go through their life story, and then you could play the whole thing again, except you choose a different character and go through their story. So there's a lot of replay value here. And even if you don't want that, you could just play through the game and use the instant scenario cards, but then it's not so much of a story-driven game at that point. But with Near and Far, it looks beautiful on the table. This is Ryan Laukatt's nicely illustrated universe again. I mean, this guy's just basically a one-man machine doing everything on here. But I really get a kick out of this one. Friends of mine are big fans of this one, even though they struggle to work out how to beat me at it. I don't know why. They have a problem of trying to do too much in the game and not focusing on the biggest aspect they need to concentrate on. And in this game, you kind of do need to have some focus. Trying to do a bit of everything will not work. But I love the story that's in it. You go through the campaign, you find out, oh, who does this Red King do? Oh, I want to know more. And everybody's hunting down those quests to find out more. And then when you go to the next map, the story's developed a bit further. Again, we're not talking brain-burny levels of story here, but certainly we are talking a very thematic game with a decent Euro game behind it. The Above and Below's Euro game didn't make me that interested, and so apart from getting the occasional story excerpt, I wasn't that into it. Whereas this one, I'm not entirely desperate to get the quests. I want to find out more of the story, but it's not the first thing I'm hunting down. But if I get one, great. I want to know more about what my character's like. Tell me more. And that's a good hallmark, again, of a story-driven game. So, Near and Far, Ryan Laukatt's second best game I think he's ever done, in my personal opinion. Near and Far. My number 5 is a solid, again, app-integrated game. Apps just make games that much better. I'm sorry, some people hate on app integration in games, but, I get where they're coming from. Some people might prefer to play a video game if it's too app integrated, but some of these games are just so good with apps now, it can't be ignored. And this one is one of my favourite detective-style deduction games, Chronicles of Crime. This one came out as a kind of shall we say, an easier alternative to another detective game. And the idea was that this one used the phone as a way of scanning QR codes. You had all these cards, like the clue items and the locations and the people, and you played through a story trying to solve a crime like any other detective story, except every time you wanted to talk to someone about anything, you had to scan the card with your smartphone, and it scanned the QR code, and then something happened. Like the person would talk to you, and you would go, I've got this bloody handkerchief here. Hang on a minute, let me just scan my forensic scientist over here. Boop, yep, what can I do for you? scan my bloody handkerchief, and then suddenly, it gives you a text on like, oh yeah, this one's got blood type B on it, and then you realise, oh, there's some clue about somebody who claimed that their blood type was B, and it's linking to them, and you play through what is a pretty good story. Now, granted, even though it's fairly easy to pick up, it's hard to succeed at it. Either that or I just suck at deduction games. I think I am not the best detective in the world. But I play through these and I'm like, I can't figure this stuff out. It's like, how does people know this? So I'm not the best one to do this with, but I enjoy it a lot as a solo. The noir versions, I can't wait to try those. The noir version and the Backstreet Boys version, I'm not sure what it was, like the Backstreet Kids thing. And they're pretty good, but just playing through the base like game scenarios and the DLC is like really good stuff. I am enjoying it, even though the app can be a little frustrating because sometimes you scan the wrong thing or you forget that you've got to say goodbye to someone before you scan something else and it wastes time and you can't undo it, which is really annoying. And sometimes it's like, I know I need to talk to you in order to get you to do something, but I can't because I can't figure out what combination I need to scan your thing with. I know you're important, I know you need to do this, but because I haven't scanned this one card before I talk to you, I can't do it, and that gets a little frustrating as well, where you know more than the app apparently knows. So, like I say, those foibles aside, this is hugely popular. I can see why. It's a great story. All these short stories are great. Cannot wait to try the noir and other versions. I think the noir one really interests me because you can kind of be a little bit more sleazy, a little bit more like underhanded with your approach. That's got my buzz as well, and of course this one will be easily expandable into the future. So, my number 5, Chronicles of Crime. Whew, I was quite lucky there. Literally, I turned the camera off because the camera can't do more than something like 20 minutes of film before it shuts down. And I noticed that I literally had about 80 seconds going before my memory card ran out of space. So that was lucky. But thankfully, didn't have a problem with that. My number 4, though, is probably... It is fighting the top spot for my favourite game of all time. I adore this game. I wish I could play it relentlessly all the time. Unfortunately, time is my biggest enemy. But my God, do I love playing through the story and the scenarios with The Lord of the Rings LCG. And yes, I don't mind showing off this little case. Laser, I believe they called themselves like Laser Designs or something now. They were doing these like really nice antique boxes, for card storage. They were for LCGs. They got the things engraved on it, like Arkham Horror and Lord of the Rings itself. And this isn't my only carry case for it. I've got a whole massive box up there full of stuff as well, and 2 lever arch files for it. But yep, I love these boxes. They're great. They open up, you've got more cards in there. I mean, what are these? I think these are recent cycles as well as my 2 decks. I've got a Dale deck. I've got a Sylvian Elf deck. And who's this one? Who's this one over here? This is that was a Haldan deck. That wasn't doing that well. But I can make whatever deck I want. Do I want elves, dwarfs, Rohan, hobbits? Hobbits I've got really good at that, actually. And just so many combinations, so many scenarios. But not just the mechanics. The idea is that you are playing each cycle and it is a story at the end of the day. So you start off with an introduction and then you play the first scenario. And the scenario itself is a story because you have the quest stages. So you start off, for example, I'm trying to think of a really good one. Let's see. You start off by trying to cross the desert. And, no, even better example, Lost Temple, I think it's called, or something like that, from the Grey Haven cycle. You, first of all, have to arrive on this island. So first of all, your first quest card might just be to get there, or to land and deal with some imminent bear or spider that's attacking you. And, then you get to the next quest stage, and suddenly it's like, now you have to find your way through the forest to get to the Lost Temple, and suddenly the whole game changes, because first you were fighting this big monster, and now you have to navigate this 5x5 grid of location cards, and you're exploring each one, going to cliffs and lakes and forests until eventually you find the temple. And then the third act of the scenario might be that you've reached the temple, but you have to kill the guard, the undead guard at the front of it. And that's a simplified scenario, not entirely what the scenario does, but the story unfolds, and after you've done the scenario, the whole scenario, you read another bit of the story, and then like the epilogue of the scenario, and then you go on to the next scenario and read the introduction, play through that, read the epilogue of that, and you carry on until the whole story is resolved. Again, it's kind of like Middle-earth short stories, a bit like what Journeys to the Middle-earth did. But, and that's just the new content. You can play through the Hobbit's films, you can play through the actual Lord of the Rings movies, there's loads of them like that. So I can play a Hobbit deck and actually face off, like trying to escape the Black Riders. I can defend Helm's Deep, I can fight Shelob. Well, I say fight Shelob, I can encounter Shelob, and then she will scare the living daylights out of me and then eat me, is what she kind of does regularly. But, and you can do all these different stories, experience them all with whatever deck you like. I mean, it doesn't have to be canon with the film. Yes, I'm playing through escaping the Black Riders with hobbits. Well, I could change it, make it dwarfs instead, kind of mix Hobbit and Lord of the Rings together. But, so thematic, so enjoyable. So much replayability. Yes, it's a huge money sink. Aren't all LCGs, I fully admit that. But it's been like my top 3 favorite game for ages. It almost knocked Sentinels of the Multiverse off my top number 1. It's constantly fighting. Do really love this game, and this is just me playing it entirely solo. I've not even played this two-handed yet. Solo two-handed. This is just pure solo, and I love it to bits. I would happily try this with 2 actual players. I'd happily try it with 4 and see what it's like. It is a great game, but story-wise, you're playing through the story and the quest cards have an impact, but the 3 after this, I feel the story is a little bit more involved, a little bit more interesting in a sense, because you kind of know what's going to happen with these stories. And of course, you read through a small introduction, and then you get into the meat of the game, and then you read a small epilogue, and then you get into the meat of the game again. So, it was hard to rank my top 5, I must admit. But Lord of the Rings, my number 4. Love, love, love this game.
You're not sleeping with it, are you, Ray?
My number 3 is similar to the Journeys of Middle-earth game that I was doing before. Yes, granted, it has app integration. It is basically a longer, slightly more involved version of Journeys of Middle-earth. And of course, it's Mansions of Madness. Specifically, 2.0. Nobody cares about Mansions of Madness 1.0. Get out of my face. Mansions of Madness 2.0 is the definitive Mansions of Madness, where you have the app doing like a lot of the bookkeeping part for you, but it's playing immersive theme music. It's allowing you to have thematic combats where it actually tells you what the combatants are doing, and it's got a lot of DLC at this point. It's had a lot of expansions, but if you want to play probably the most, well, not the most, maybe it's hard to say really. You could call it the most immersive Arkham game that exists, maybe the second most, who knows, but it's certainly like through an app, plays through a story, like you're playing through, one of those games on the PC where you move your characters around and then you click on the next puzzle to solve. And, there's not a huge amount of puzzle solving in this. You've got a little bit, but it's not exactly brain burny. But, it adds to the theme, and you've got all sorts of different monsters that you'll fight, the cultists, the ghost spirits, big gribbly winged Bakshi, Bayaki things, a Cthulhu star spawn, goat spawn. There's, Yog Sothoth, weird tentacle things with multiple mouths in them. There's some grisly stuff in here. But it's definitely longer than Lord of the Rings Journey Middle-earth. That is a problem. But I play this predominantly solo anyway. And it definitely requires you to play with at least 3, if not 4 investigators. I actually played this 4-handed because you kind of need to have that balance of investigators running around the place. But other than that, love the stories. Some stories want you to battle a ton of minions. Some of them go to multiple locations, like you start off in a hotel and then suddenly you're out on the street. And then, suddenly you have to now go to the docks and it's a completely different set of tiles. Stories can be one act long. It could be multiple acts long. You could be fighting a bunch of monsters. You could be like escorting someone. You could be trying to find a lost person, or you could just be trying to play a deductive whodunit story. The last one I played, I think, was a whodunit story on an airship. There's some great story-based choices that you do here. And granted, the app is just so good in this. It's gotta be, is it the best? well, certainly from my perspective, yeah. I mean, it is the best app integration I have seen for a board game. Wonderfully immersive, bit of a money sink again, but then pretty much a lot of these games on this list are probably a bit of a money sink. And is it the best Arkham Horror story-driven game? Wait and see. My number 2 is not necessarily a game that I would say was like my top 10 of all time. It's certainly in my top 50, possibly top 30, I don't know, but it's one that I'm really enjoying, particularly with the last expansion that just came out. I've got one more scenario to do in that, in fact. But, oh my god, yes. This is my pick of all the deduction games for being a detective. And funny enough, I kind of spoiled it ages ago without even realising. Yes, it is Portal's Detective. Portal's Detective, heavy base deduction game. Mostly done with cards, but you have the website that you're keying in fingerprint IDs and looking up mugshots and Wikipedia links to find out more stuff. It's wonderfully immersive, it's unreal. But hard as nails. I have failed this more times than I have succeeded in cases. Like I say, I'm not a good detective, apparently. But the story keeps me going as well, because you think, well, it's just a deck of cards. What could it really do with a deck of cards? There's a lot of text on these cards, and the story's pretty intricate. I mean, I probably know more about my good guys, certainly in the first scenarios I was playing. I know more about what his dietary requirements are than I do about the actual crime itself. But you know, as you go through each card, it reveals more of the plot, and then you realise it's not just this little case of a small murder. Now it's suddenly this big overarching plot that you don't find out about until you get into the later scenarios. It plays through a big campaign. Granted, I think 5 episodes for a campaign is too long, but they've addressed this. Ignacy addressed this and gave us an expansion called LA Crimes with 3 scenarios for a campaign. And 3 is much more manageable. But I'm loving the LA Crimes one. Ah, yeah, you want to play the 80s style cop movies in a box, you play LA Crimes. And put on the soundtrack to Beverly Hills Cop, Lethal Weapon, what are the ones? Lethal Weapon, Beverly Hills Cop. Not technically Die Hard, I suppose you could call Die Hard. I don't know. I don't know a lot of Cap buddy movies, but just imagine all the ones that you know. Well, Police Academy even, you could probably do, but I'm sure there's better examples. My brain is not remembering a lot of Cap movies. But certainly, this is the theme you want. This is the game you want for this theme. And as I say, the story is solid. I've played through the big campaign in the base game is really good. Very involved, very like, oh my god, my brain's melting. I had a pre-order scenario, a one-shot case, and I want more of those, please, Ignacy. Those are really good. I think there are some more on the way, written by designers. And so you can play through a small story, but the story's still interesting. It's kind of like an episode of a CSI show. Tune in next week to find out whether so-and-so locates missing child or whatever. And LA Crimes one, again, I'm going through the cards and I go to somewhere and I think, this will be pretty routine. And then suddenly you flip the card and the story thickens and you find someone there you didn't expect. It's, really good. I really do get immersed in this one. This is kind of what I wanted. Again, 1 to 5 players. Yeah, you could possibly get away with 4 players if you don't mind each person having a small role, or if you've got a very closely knit group that wants to roleplay it. But otherwise, you're probably better off with less players. And certainly, I have a blast playing this by myself. It's a great solo game as well. Almost my number 1. Story-based immersion, off the charts, but not quite as much for what it gives you as my number 1. My number 1, yes, well, you kind of saw this coming. Oh, look, another brown box. Yes, this one instead has the insignia for Miskatonic University on here, and that's because my favourite story-based game, and like I say, not my favourite game of the ones on this list. I dare say that I probably actually prefer Lord of the Rings to this one. Yeah, I actually do prefer Lord of the Rings LCG to this one, but when it comes to the story, wow. This one manages to do the impossible. It makes the story so immersive, both during the game and in between games. You have a decent amount of epilogue and introductions to do, but for the better part of it, it's not just simply, read this introduction. Now read this epilogue. Now do the scenario, now read this introduction. It's not the same as that, because unlike the Lord of the Rings one, this one has branching paths. You have story-based choices to make in between games and even during the scenarios. You might come across a bit of the plot and it's like you find an old lady and she tells you need to save her, but you think, oh, I've got to carry on with this mission. Can I trust her? Do you help her? Do you not? And whatever you choose to do has an effect on the rest of the scenario and possibly even ramifications later on in the campaign. Such really good branching paths, and granted there was less of them in the early cycles, but of course LCGs get better over time, and in recent scenarios, like the Circle Undone stuff, I'm falling behind on that. I've only played the deluxe expansion. I need to play through 3 packs of the stuff. Maybe I'll get time after this to actually have a go at it, but or maybe I'll play Journeys in Middle Earth. I don't know, I can't decide, but there's so much story, so many choices. The replay value is off the charts because, again, you can choose a different branching path, which will give you a different bit of story to read. And that's assuming you don't just play with different investigators anyway that give you a different feel. But all the cycle stories have been wonderfully immersive. The stories have been interesting, grisly and dark and sort of mind-bending. But it's how... Remember when I said in the Lord of the Rings LCG that the quests stages kind of influence how the scenario played? It does so in the Lord of the Rings. This takes it up to 11. This one has you, you're going into a temple and you're navigating a few traps, you're hiding around, you're just trying to find your way, and then you find the big idol like time thing that you need. And then suddenly you get to the next act, and suddenly all the locations go into one big conga line, and suddenly you have to bucket for the exit down this one route through a bunch of enemies. It's like completely changes the cadence of the game. And then there are other ones where you've got to, you've got a hotel that you're in, or a theatre or something, and, the cards in the middle are the elevator, and then the others are the floors, so you have to go into the elevator to get to the other floor. It just fits thematically with the story. And one of my favourites was the Essex County train, whatever it was. And you were on a conga line of train carts, but you had to keep moving quick because behind you, all the train carts were getting sucked into this giant portal. So the locations kept disappearing. Story so good. You ask a lot of people out there, and granted, a few people on the Patreon list and like on YouTube and that were saying, oh yeah, this one. Particularly with Tom Vassel's top 10 list he did, because he's not played Arkham Horror LCG. I don't think or not played it much. So loads of people in his comments were basically saying, what about Arkham Horror LCG? What about Arkham Horror LCG? And it's like, don't worry guys, I got your back on this one. And so does Z Garcia. He loves this as well. Honestly, if this is not his #1 game next time on his top 100, I'm calling foul. This has to beat out Pandemic by now. But I digress. It is a solid, story-based Arkham Horror game. The best story-driven Arkham-based game. Like I say, closely followed behind by Mansions of Madness 2.0, but this one is so good for story. Granted, I prefer playing Lord of the Rings LCG mechanically. But then maybe I prefer Mansions of Madness mechanically to this as well. I don't know. The Chaos Bag leaves a bit of a sour taste in my mouth at times because you could have like the best laid plan, then you pull out and you just get a bad run with tokens. That can sour it a little bit. So maybe I prefer Mansions of Madness, but then you both dice in that one. So I don't know, tomato. But certainly do love it for what it provides. Miskatonic, Arkham Horror, the LCG. So, my top 10 story-based driven games, and looking at my honourable mentions, there were certainly some ones I considered, but I did put Eldritch Horror / Arkham Horror 3rd Edition on the list. They do tell a bit of a cohesive story, but they also feel a little bit like lots of events jumbled together, but I was tempted by it. I think the main problem with Eldritch Horror is that it's just so bloated now. I struggle to get it out of the box. It's ridiculous. And I did consider Pandemic Legacies, but, I enjoy them. And they're on my wall, actually, the boards, you can't see them. But the story wasn't the best element of them. I enjoyed playing the Pandemic games and seeing how the rules changed up, but it's not like I was that gripped into the stories. They threw up some good twists and it's like that, but, Pandemic Legacy Season 2 I found quite predictable. And Legacy Season 1 threw in some better twists, but again, you kind of saw it coming. So, it's hit and miss, but I think they're really good, and certainly, I ranked them highly when I played them, so they deserve an honourable mention. Now, in terms of other ones I got rid of because of the caveat, there were things like Robinson Crusoe, First Martians, Western Legends, Alien Legendary, those sort of games where I thought they're more about the scenarios and then event cards triggering. First Martians, you play a scenario, but then anything could happen on the app. Same with Robinson Crusoe with the cards. Alien Legendary, yeah, you play through a story, but it's not like you're massively watching the story unfold. And what was the other one? Western Legends, again, open-ended, yes. It's kind of, you're not really playing through a specific story. And I suppose Empires of the Void 2 could have been an honourable mention, but again, the event cards are great, but it's just adding story elements. It's not really a story-driven game. So that was kind of what I did with the caveat. Now, in terms of the the Patreon choice, a lot of them duplicated with mine, unfortunately, but there was one that slipped the mark, and I have to admit, you're probably wondering, where is this game on your list? How dare you? So it's a Patreon choice for this week, and I wholeheartedly agree that Mice and Mystics / Stuffed Fables is a worthy Patreon choice. Now, granted, I have not played these games, but all I hear about them are generally good things. The thing is, I'm not the target audience for them. I'll probably really enjoy them, but they're usually the ones that families play. They play them to get their kids involved. But I don't have kids. I don't want them, I don't have them, and I don't tend to play a lot of games with kids either. So these aren't the two games that I'm likely to get to the table. But when I look at them, when I've watched reviews, I've seen, like introduction mission playthroughs of them, they do look cool. It makes me want to play them. I just don't think it will ever happen. But certainly all I hear from people who I know who are families, and I even recommended, I might have even bought one for something. Did I buy one? I got it cheap in a trade. I think I gave it to some friends of mine, Mice and Mystics. And, they've been really loving it. Their kids have enjoyed it. It's a simplified story, but again, they've enjoyed them. Mice and Mystics was like controlling these anthropomorphic rats, and, you were like escaping the cat and fighting cockroaches and stuff. And the Stuffed Fables has you playing these stuffed toys, trying to go into a little girl's dreams and sort out her nightmares or something like that. But both of them, all I hear is good stuff. Very rarely do I hear negative reviews on them. And I think certainly if you're part of a family and you want to get your kids involved in a story-driven game, look no further than Mice and Mystics or Stuffed Fables. Both of them, I think, will suit you down to the ground. I hear that Stuffed Fables is the better of the two, but, it's kind of pick your poison, really. What theme do you prefer, the whole dream thing or the mice thing? And yeah, definitely, I think, even though I've not played it, I still think it's a decent Patreon choice because I feel bad for not even mentioning it on my top 10 just because I haven't played it. People might be thinking, well, what about Comanauts? Same publisher and all that. No, I played Comanauts. I reviewed that earlier this year. You can check out my video on that. The story was really good. I'll give it that. The story was great. The mechanics, though, not so much. Very luck-driven and very linear and just, didn't work for me. But like I say, I pretty much just read through the book and found out the story, and that was decent enough. So probably would have been better as a novel than it would have been an actual board game. So yeah, Mice and Mystics, Stuffed Fables, Patreon choice. So that's it for another Top 10. Next one will probably be Board Game Apps. Board Game Apps has been heavily requested, so I'll probably do that one next. And then I'll do Top 10 games that I believe should get a deluxe version, if I can think of enough good contenders. The problem I've had is that a lot of the games that I thought, oh yeah, I really want to see a deluxe version of that, are already getting deluxe versions. I mean, Cleopatra and the Society of Architects is getting a deluxe version. Suburbia is getting a deluxe version. All these games that I thought, yeah, they need a deluxe version. Well, they are. So it's ruining my list. You're bringing out these amazing games again for me to buy on Kickstarter. Believe me, my wallet is suffering. And I can't make a top 10 list as easily. But we'll get onto that. I'm sure I'll think of 10 others that deserve it. So, that's it for me. I'll see you on the next Broken Meeple video, and feel for me while I'm doing this 2-week audit. It's a lot of work. I've got to do extended hours throughout all the weekdays. It's the first time I've done this particular job in my new employment. I got to work hard, because getting it all done and sorted properly is if I don't do it, then I run the risk of not being able to make the UK Games Expo. I've booked time off, but I need to have this job finished before I go. So, fingers crossed, I'm going to put in the effort so I can see you guys at the UK Games Expo. So that's it for me. See you then. Take care, and remember, whether it's a short story, a long story, horror story, whatever kind of story you like, just remember, it's only a game. Take care, and I'll see you next time. And cheers.